The police report says I attacked him at 10:04 p.m. They have photos to prove it. The broken porcelain lamp, the whiskey spilled on the Persian rug. What they don't have is the sound of my husband's calm, medical voice minutes before telling me I was imagining everything. My name is Julian Croft, and the man I allegedly assaulted is Dr. Julian Croft, my husband, the psychiatrist. The man who spent the last 6 months telling our friends, in low, worried voices, that I was fragile, confused, that I wasn't coping well with stress. That night, I wasn't stressed. I was lucid. I had just found proof that his patient was sleeping in my bed. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He diagnosed me. He stepped back, using the tone he used with volatile patients, saying, "Ilara, darling, your paranoia is getting the better of you. You need to calm down." When the police arrived, and he called them so quickly, I was holding the pieces of the broken lamp. His mistress was huddled in the corner, pretending to cry. And Julian was standing in the doorway of our room with that professional and compassionate sadness on his face, explaining that his wife was having a severe psychotic episode. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was the doctor. I was the patient. And as they placed the cold handcuffs on my wrists, I saw her smile over his shoulder. I wasn't arrested that night. I was replaced. That feeling of having your reality stolen from you, it's terrifying. Has anyone ever felt so discredited that they doubted their own sanity? I love knowing who's with me on this journey. Please write in the comments which city or country you are listening from. I barely remember the police car. It's a blur of red lights and the cold touch of handcuffs on my wrist. But the transport van, that I remember. It had no windows, just a small grate on the roof. The smell was what marked me most, a mixture of bleach, old dust, and the metallic odor of fear. That's a smell you don't forget, the smell of places where hope goes to die. When they pulled me out, the morning light blinded me for a second, a last cruel glimpse of the world I'd lost. The admission room was painted a sickly green, the color of bile. I was no longer Julian Croft, the hostess of elegant dinners, the wife of the brilliant Dr. Croft. I was a number, a file, a walking diagnosis of acute emotional instability, exactly as Julian had written in his hasty assessment. The guard, a woman with eyes as opaque as the concrete walls, barked my new name, a series of digits. I watched the steel door slide shut. Julian hadn't just left me, he'd erased me. He used his power, his medical authority, to turn my pain into a diagnosis, and my diagnosis into a prison cell. They ordered me to undress. The humiliation was a physical chill, penetrating my skin faster than the draft of air coming from the hallway. "Take off all the jewelry," the guard ordered. My fingers automatically went for my wedding ring. Gold. 15 years. Julian's promise to protect me. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the last anchor of my sanity. Proof that Mrs. Croft, of whom my life he had it had happened. When I hesitated, the guard ripped the ring from my finger, the metal scratching my skin. They gave me a blue-gray uniform, rough as sandpaper, that vaguely smelled of another woman's fear. I was marched down a corridor that echoed with sounds I didn't yet understand. Someone's distant cry, the sudden crunch of metal against metal, the hiss of a walkie-talkie. It was a place where every sound seemed like a muffled scream. Then, the cell. It wasn't a room. It was a concrete box. The door wasn't made of wood. It was solid steel with a small barred window that looked like an eye judging me. The door slammed shut with a sound of utter finality. One claqué metallic, heavy sound echoed in my chest, seeming to suck all the air from the small space. And then, silence. Not the peaceful silence of my home library, but a thick, heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. I stood in the center of the small gray room, my hands touching the thin mattress atop the metal frame. That was it. Julian had won. He took my voice, then my home, and now my freedom. He warned me this would happen. "Ilara," he would say in that professional, condescending voice, "you're not well. If you continue with these accusations, you'll force my hand. People will think you're losing your mind." He didn't predicted my breakdown. He wrote, and as I sat on that cold bed, I realized the terrifying truth. The only way to survive this place was to remember every detail of how I got here, even if remembering felt exactly like the madness they accused me of. The silence that followed, clack the door was heavy, but not empty. It vibrated. My eyes, burning with humiliation and still adjusting to the harsh glare of the hallway lights, slowly began to make out the darkness. The cell was a concrete box, perhaps 2 meters by 3, and in the deepest part of the shadow, on the top bunk, something was breathing. For a full minute, I didn't move, nor did the form. It was a stalemate. I was a strange object introduced into a sealed ecosystem. I was the contamination. The air, already tainted with the metallic smell of unwashed bodies and strong disinfectant, was now thick with a new kind of tension. It was the primal, animal tension of territory. I could smell something else, too, beneath the bleach. Faint, forbidden cigarette smoke, and something slightly sweet, like rotten fruit. I was still Julian Croft, wife of a respected doctor, patron of the arts. But that identity was a joke there. It was a silk dress in a slaughterhouse. There, I was just the newcomer, the variable. And the woman in the shadows was the constant. She had all the knowledge. She knew which guard was cruel, which was lazy, when the lights went out, and where the rats hid. I knew nothing. I gripped the rough fabric of my new uniform, my knuckles white. My whole body ached from the fight with Julian, from processing it, from the cold. I saw the 2 bunk beds. The top one was shaped, the bottom one was empty. It seemed logical, the only available space. I moved toward it, my legs trembling, intending only to sit on the edge. Before my hand even touched the thin, plastic-covered mattress, a low voice slipped from the shadows. No, it wasn't loud, but it was worn and had absolute authority. It stopped me instantly. "That one," the voice continued, slow and deliberate, "is mine." I looked up, and it finally leaned toward the sliver of light coming from the hallway grate. All I could see were her eyes, dark and reflecting the dim light, and a spiderweb tattoo near her temple. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. I'm sorry," I whispered. Where am I going?" I hated the tremor in my voice, hated the weakness. She sat up completely, swinging her legs to the side. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 20s, but her face was sculpted with a hardness that made her ageless. "You go where I say you go." She landed lightly on the floor and stood inches from me. I flinched. "You breathe when I say you breathe, and you never touch my things." She pointed to a small, worn Bible on the floor, its pages curled up. "That's mine." She pointed to the only metal sink. "That's mine." She pointed to the bottom bunk I almost touched. "That's mine, too. I like to swap." She paused, savoring the moment. You stay on the floor, near the door, until I decide otherwise. The floor, near the door, where the coldest draft would hit, where the guards, passing by, could look and see me huddled like an animal. In my old life, I had complained to hotel managers if the thread count of the Egyptian cotton sheets was too low. Now, my entire territory was a piece of icy, sticky linoleum 60 centimeters by 1 meter and 80. This was the moment when the true visceral horror of Julian's betrayal set in. He hadn't just hair to the world that I was unstable. He had met-tornado unstable. He threw me into a situation where my sanity was the first thing I would have to sacrifice to survive. All the etiquette, the university education, the social graces I had cultivated were useless there. Worse, they were a liability. They were a language no one spoke, a sign of weakness, a kick-me sign written in calligraphy. This woman, my new guardian, didn't care about my vocabulary or my dinners. She cared about power, And I had none. I realized that Julian hadn't just put me in one prison. He had put me in prison. That he, the meticulous psychiatrist, knew exactly what this environment would do to someone like me. This wasn't just punishment. It was a calculated experiment. As I slid down the wall, my back pressed against the cold, damp concrete, I understood. The battle wasn't just to prove my sanity to the outside world. The battle was to stop my mind from shattering in the world, inside here. A high-pitched buzzing sound came from somewhere in the hallway, followed by thunk, the heavy throbbing of a master circuit breaker. The fluorescent lights in the hallway didn't go out, but the light in my cell did, plunging me into near-total darkness. It was a thick, suffocating darkness that felt like it had weight. My eyes widened, trying to find any shape, any outline, but there was nothing. The only glimmer of light was a sickly yellowish rectangle projected onto the floor through the crack under the steel door, the hallway light that never slept. I was on the floor, exactly where the woman in the top bunk, my cellie, as I would learn to call her, had ordered. The linoleum was icy. The cold seeped through the thin fabric of my uniform and lodged in my bones. It was a damp cold, a stone-cold cold, and it felt like it was rising from the very foundation of the building. I curled up, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small a target as possible, though I didn't know for what. The night, I discovered, was not silent. The day was about shouted orders and the clanging of doors. The night was about the sounds humans try to hide. 300 meters away, in another wing, a man began to scream. Not a scream of anger, but of pure terror, a sound that was abruptly cut off. Closer, 2 or 3 cells away, a woman began to cry. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of withdrawal, an animalistic, low, desperate sound that scratched at the silence. And above me, the most disturbing sound of all, the rhythmic, deep breathing of my cellmate. She was sleeping as if she were in her own bed, in her own home. The ease with which she succumbed to unconsciousness in this place was the final proof that I was in an alien universe. I, on the other hand, was rigid. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting. What was I waiting for? I didn't know. An attack? The guards? Julian himself, magically appearing to say it was all a test? Every creak of the metal, every footstep echoing in the hallway made my heart race. But the loudest sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside my own head. In the darkness, with nothing to distract my eyes, Julian's voice was everywhere. "Ilara, are you listening to yourself? You sound unbalanced." His calm, rational voice filled my cell. I began to replay the night, again and again, like a broken film. His lover, Chloe, with her pale face and wide eyes. The porcelain lamp. I grabbed it, of that I was sure. But did I throw it? Or was it ripped from my hand in the struggle? I honestly couldn't remember. The image was fragmented, broken like the porcelain itself. He knows that, I realized with a shiver. He's a psychiatrist. He knows that trauma fragments memory. He wasn't just lying to others. He was using his knowledge of my mind against me. He was counting on the fact that, under enough pressure, my own memory would betray me. And the worst part, the most terrifying thought I had that night, huddled on the cold floor, was that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe I had driven mad. Perhaps the pain of his betrayal had truly broken something inside me. That was the real prison. It wasn't the concrete walls. It was the cage of doubt he built inside my skull. Sleep wasn't a refuge. It was an exhausted, half-closed surrender to the cold floor. I was ripped from it not by a gentle awakening, but by a sound that seemed to tear through the very air. A shrill, piercing alarm designed to shock the system. Instantly, the fluorescent lights on the ceiling crackled, flooding the tiny cell with an unforgiving, cold, white light. It exposed every blemish on the wall, every crack in the concrete. The light didn't seem meant to illuminate. It seemed meant to inspect, to expose. I blinked, my eyes burning, the headache from the previous night throbbing behind my temples. Above me, in the bunk, my cellmate was already in motion. She didn't stretch. She didn't groan. She swung her legs off the bed and put on her plastic shoes in a single, fluid, practiced movement. Her face a mask of indifference. She was a machine attuned to this place, and I was a broken cog. "At the door!" a male voice shouted in the hallway, the sound amplified by the echo of the concrete. "Count! Now!" My cellmate nudged me with her foot, not maliciously, but with impatient urgency. "Get up, you idiot, or they'll lock us in here all day. Hands up." I dragged myself to my feet, my limbs stiff from the cold floor. We stood side by side, facing the steel door, while heavy footsteps stopped outside. The small metal slit in the door slid open with a creak. An eye appeared. He didn't look at us as people. He scanned us like inventory. "Too present," he murmured into his radio, and the slit closed. That was it. No good morning, no Julian Croft, just too present. At that moment, I was officially a head of cattle, and Julian's promise was complete. I wasn't even a patient anymore. I was a statistic, a cell occupant, my name and my story erased by the cold arithmetic of the institution. We were ushered, a silent, sleepy group of women in identical blue uniforms, into what they called the cafeteria. The smell hit me first. A mixture of burnt coffee, disinfectant, and something vaguely sour that might have been porridge. The noise was deafening, the scraping of hundreds of plastic trays on metal tables, the hum of hushed conversations, the occasional shout of a guard. I picked up my tray. The porridge was a gray paste, the bread was stale, the coffee was brown water. But the food was the least of the humiliations. The real challenge was finding a place to sit. Each table seemed like a demarcated territory, an island of alliances and hierarchies I didn't understand. I started to make my way to an empty seat at a table near the wall. An older woman, her hair pulled back so tightly it tugged at her face, slowly looked up from her coffee. She said nothing. She just smiled. It wasn't a smile. It was a warning, a silent growl that said, "Try." I stopped, the blood draining from my face. This was Julian's world, a world where every social rule I knew was inverted, where survival depended not on intelligence or grace, but on a primal brutality I lacked. I recoiled, my tray of cold food trembling in my hands, and realized the real judgment hadn't been in the courtroom. The real judgment was only just beginning. 2 days passed in that gray fog of counts and cold lights. 2 cycles of sleeping on the icy floor and waking to the alarm that sounded like a tear in reality. My cellmate, whose name I learned was Maya, rarely spoke. She just watched, her dark eyes registering my every move, keeping me permanently on edge. On the 3rd morning, my number was called right after the count. A different guard, a man who seemed bored with his own life, led me through a labyrinth of corridors I hadn't seen before. The smell of bleach was stronger here, mixed with the aroma of stale coffee and floor wax. He stopped before a heavy metal door and opened it, gesturing for me to enter. The room was small, windowless, and dominated by a metal table bolted to the floor. On the other side of the table sat a man who wasn't Julian. For a second, a wave of relief almost overwhelmed me. He was older, with slumped shoulders and a poorly fitting brown suit. He looked tired. He was the opposite of Julian's polished charisma and predatory energy. He was just a man. His name, Dr. Eris, was on a plastic plaque on the table. This was my chance. My first chance to speak to someone in a position of authority who wasn't the architect of my downfall. He gestured to the bolted-on metal chair beside me at the table, and I sat down. The metal was cold against the backs of my legs, even through my uniform. Between us on the table was my file. It was thick. I recognized Julian's elegant handwriting on the label. My stomach clenched. He had preceded me. He was already in the room. Dr. Eris opened the file, and I could hear the dry sound of the paper as he flipped through the pages. He didn't look at me for a long time. He was reading. He was absorbing the fiction Julian had created. When he finally looked up, his glasses reflected the fluorescent light. "Julian Croft," he said, His voice was monotone. "I am Dr. Aris. I have been assigned to oversee your case during your evaluation." He glanced back at the papers. "Your husband has provided a very thorough history. He speaks of a pattern of erratic behavior, episodes of paranoia, persecutory delusions." I didn't let him finish. I couldn't. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Doctor, whatever he wrote, it's not true." I struggled to keep my voice calm, rational. I knew how this would sound. I knew exactly how Julian had cornered me. My husband, Dr. Croft, he was having an affair with one of his patients. I found out. I confronted him. What he described as a psychotic episode was a fight. He told me, gaslighted, he lied. He had me committed to silence me, to get me out of the way. I watched his face. I searched for any sign, a glimpse of understanding, of surprise, even of curiosity. There was nothing. He simply picked up a pen and made a note in the file. He didn't even look at me as he wrote. "Mrs. Croft," he said, his voice still in that monotonous, bureaucratic tone, "your husband also noticed that you would develop elaborate narratives to justify your outbursts. He predicted that you would see him as an antagonist." I recoiled as if he had slapped me. It was there. Julian, the brilliant psychiatrist, hadn't just accused me. He had predicted my defenses. He had turned my own sanity into a trap. If I denied it, I was paranoid. If I cried, I was unstable. If I explained calmly, as I tried to do, I was constructing elaborate narratives. Dr. Aris closed my file. The sound was soft, but it felt like a coffin closing. "We'll meet twice a week, Alara. For now, I suggest you focus on accepting that you need help." He pressed a button under the table. The door opened and the board guard was there. The hope that had sprung up in my chest withered and died. I understood. No one was coming to save me. The system wasn't broken. It was working perfectly, exactly as Julian intended. I wasn't fighting a man. I was fighting his file. And his file had more credibility than I ever would. Returning to my cell after my meeting with Dr. Aris was like being plunged twice into the same icy river. The first time shocks, the second numbs. I went back to the block, but something in me had changed. The small, fragile flame of hope that justice or reason would prevail was extinguished. When the guard shoved me back into the cell, Maya was there, lying on the top bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling. She didn't even turn around, but I felt her eyes on me. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. The smell of failure was on me, stronger than laundry soap. She just said, without moving, "So, they told you you're crazy." It wasn't a question. It was a welcoming statement. That day, for the first time, she went down and sat on the bottom bunk, what she called the living room. I remained in my designated spot on the floor, near the door. She lit a smuggled cigarette, the acrid smell of tobacco filling the air. "You think you're the only one," she murmured, exhaling the smoke. "Everyone here has been betrayed by someone out there. Husband, brother, lawyer. It doesn't matter. You're not here because you did something. You're here because someone else needed that you were here." The real lesson began later, in the refectory, at what they called dinner. The same gray pasta, the same stale bread. I picked up my tray, the sound of metal clanging echoing in the vast hall. The noise was oppressive. It was the sound of hundreds of women who had lost everything, trying to reclaim something, even if it was just noisy chatter. I remembered the woman's silent warning on my first morning. This time, I sought the safest place. There was a seat at the end of a long table, isolated, where no one was sitting. It seemed neutral, a place where I wouldn't bother anyone. I walked over, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on my back. I sat down. The silence around me was different from the silence of my cell. It was a vacuum. I began to eat, my eyes fixed on my tray. Then a shadow fell over my food. I looked up. A huge woman with short red hair and hands that looked like shovels stood beside me. She didn't say a word. She just glanced at my tray, then at me. Then slowly, she reached out and took the only piece of bread from my tray. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The Alara from before, Dr. Croft's wife, would have protested, would have said, "Excuse me, that's mine." The Alara who spoke to Dr. Eris would have tried, arg. The woman I was becoming did nothing. I just watched. She gave me a slow smile that didn't reach her eyes. She broke the bread in half, put half back on my tray, and left with the other half. That night, back in my cell, the dampness seeming to seep into my bones, I could barely breathe from the humiliation. I hadn't said anything. I'd let her steal from me. Maya was smoking again in the darkness, the orange tip of her cigarette glowing like an eye. "I saw what happened in the cafeteria," she said softly. "Red took your bread." My throat tightened. "I didn't know what to do," I whispered. Maya let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You did the only thing you could. You paid the tax." I looked into the darkness where she was. "Tax? Nobody sits in that place," she explained, her voice becoming pedagogical. "That's the empty seat. It's where the newbies sit when they don't have a family. It's an invitation. It means you're alone. That's your fresh meat. Red taking your bread wasn't theft. It was a test. She was seeing if you would scream, if you would cry, if you would fight." She paused. "You didn't do anything. That was good. But her putting half of it back, that was the interesting part. It means she doesn't think you're worth the effort of breaking, yet." I laid my head on my knees. Julian had thrown me into a world where I needed a translator. I had spent my entire life mastering the language of subtlety, of class, of polite persuasion. Here, the language was silence. The language was territory. The language was a piece of bread stolen and returned. I was in a place where words had no value whatsoever, and words were the only weapon I had. Time out there is measured by clocks, by appointments, by the rising and setting of the sun. In here, time doesn't flow. It's broken into pieces and served to you at identical intervals, like food on a tray. The 5 a.m. alarm, the countdown, the gray breakfast paste, the recreation time in the concrete yard, the countdown, lunch, the work in the laundry, folding rough sheets that smelled of bleach and sadness, the countdown, dinner, the cell locking at 9 p.m., the alarm, the countdown, the paste. The days began to merge, becoming a single long gray blotch. Life became a series of Pavlovian reactions. The bell rings, we salivate. Or rather, we line up. I was no longer a person. I was a body being processed by the system, an object being moved from box to box on the schedule. The outside world, my house with its ivory-colored walls, my library, the scent of my own perfume, it all began to seem less like a memory and more like a movie I'd watched once, a long time ago. Maya became my instruction manual. She wasn't my friend. Friendship, I learned, was too dangerous a currency to use here. Friendship implied trust, and trust was a weakness that would be exploited. But she was my translator. She taught me the rules that weren't written on any wall. "Never look at Guard Ramirez," she told me one day while we were folding sheets, her voice low and monotone. "He likes it when you look. He likes to see fear." She taught me to keep a piece of my lunch bread in my pocket because sometimes dinner was hours late without explanation. She taught me to recognize the sound of footsteps of a guard looking for trouble versus one who was just doing his rounds. In return, I gave her my dessert, usually a watery canned peach that I couldn't swallow. It was a transaction, information for sugar. I became an expert observer. I learned to move through the corridors by making myself small, becoming part of the concrete wall. I kept my eyes downcast, my mouth shut. I became a ghost. But the silence I cultivated outwardly only made the noise inside my head louder. Routine, that crushing monotony, was Julian's perfect ally. When each day is identical to the last, how can you trust your own timeline? My memories of that night began to lose their sharpness. His lover's face, was it blonde or light brown? The lampshade, was it white porcelain Or did it have blue flowers? The uncertainty was like acid, corroding my conviction. And Julian's voice returned, not angry, but with that therapeutic and disappointed calm. You see, Ilara, you've always had difficulty with stability. You need structure. This place, however difficult it may seem, is giving you the structure you couldn't give yourself. He was using the prison itself as retroactive proof of my instability. The fact that I was here meant that I deserved being here. The routine wasn't just keeping me captive, it was convincing me to accept my own sentence. And that was the real torture. The mail was the cruelest ritual of the day. It happened at 4 p.m, right after the guard's shift change. A guard would come to the common area, where we sat on metal benches and shout names. For most of the women, nothing ever came. They just sat there, their anxious faces turning into masks of disappointment, day after day. I stopped waiting. Who would write to me? My friends, our friends. They had undoubtedly heard Julian's version. They saw me as the fragile wife who finally broke, a tragedy to be mourned in hushed tones at dinners I was now permanently absent from. My family, my sister, I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since Julian convinced me she was a destabilizing influence. He was a master at isolating his prey long before he used literal bars. So I just sat there, becoming part of the bench, a gray figure in the gray sea, until one day the guard's voice cut through the hum. Croft, Ilara. My head snapped. The name sounded strange, foreign. Nobody used my name there. I was a number. The guard was holding a single thin white envelope. He looked impatient. Croft! I stood up, my legs weak. Every eye in the room was on me. Receiving mail was an event. It signaled that you were still connected to the outside world, which made you a target. Or worse, made you weak. I picked up the envelope. It had no postmark. It was internal correspondence. My fingers trembled so much I could barely tear off the stamp. I sat down again, bending over the paper, shielding it from prying eyes. It wasn't a letter. It was a document. A legal notification. And at the top, the name of Julian's law firm, our law firm. The same one that drafted our wills and the contracts for our house. It was a divorce petition. My eyes scanned the cold legal language, but the words jumped out at me. In light of Mrs. Croft's recent and tragic hospitalization, inability to rationally participate in marital decisions, petition for expedited dissolution based on danger to herself and others. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was using the diagnosis he created as a legal weapon to erase me. He was declaring me mentally incompetent so that I couldn't contest the division of assets, so that I couldn't claim my house, so that I couldn't to speak. He was having me committed medically and at the same time legally erasing me. His mistress, Chloe, wasn't just sleeping in my bed. Julian was handing her the deed to my house. The room around me vanished. The noise, the smells, the women watching me. It was all gone. I was sucked into a vacuum of absolute silence. I could feel the paper trembling in my hand. That piece of paper was colder and harder than the concrete walls. It was proof, definitive proof that I wasn't crazy. A crazy person wouldn't need such a meticulous and cruel plan to be neutralized. A crazy person is just crazy. This was an execution. It was calculated. It was methodical. The gray fog of routine that had settled in my brain was instantly burned away by a wave of hot, white rage. The doubt Julian had so carefully planted, the uncertainty about the lampshade, about the tone of my voice, withered before this cold clarity. He wasn't just betraying me. He was stealing my entire life, piece by piece, using the very tools he swore to use to heal. That night, in the cell, I didn't sleep on the floor. I sat with my back to the wall, the divorce papers tucked under the waistband of my pants, the cold concrete seeping into my back. Maya looked at me from the darkness, but for the first time, I didn't care. Fear had been replaced by something new, something hard, something Julian, in all his brilliant analysis, never predicted. He diagnosed me as fragile. He was wrong. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to fight. Okay. Anger changed the game. Here is Block 9, Topic 9 of 15. Topic 9. The Covenant of Salt. The anger wasn't like the fire Julian described in his notes, wild, destructive, irrational. No. This was ice. It was cold, sharp, and perfectly clear. It burned away the fog of doubt he had sprayed into my mind. I didn't cry over the divorce papers. I cried them, that I read each, therefore and since, under the sickly yellow light of the hallway after Maya fell asleep. The legal language, designed to intimidate, became my Rosetta Stone. Each sentence was proof of my sanity. That night, for the first time since I arrived, it wasn't Julian's voice I heard in the darkness. It was mine. And it was angry. When morning came, I got up from the floor before the alarm. Maya watched me with cautious curiosity. I was no longer the frightened deer that had entered that cell. "You look different," she murmured, climbing down from the bunk. I looked directly at her. "I need a phone." She laughed, a humorless puff of air. "Sure, darling. And I want a steak." I didn't blink. "I'm serious. I need to make a call outside. I need a lawyer for true." Her laughter stopped. She saw that I wasn't asking or dreaming. I was planning. She sat on the bottom bunk, crossing her arms. "Do you know what a connection like this costs here?" "No," I said. "But you're going to tell me." She studied me for a long minute. "It costs more than canned peaches," she said finally. "It costs favors. It costs things you don't have." "I don't have money," I said, "but I learn fast, and I had a life out there. I know things." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" "I know how lawyers think," I said, the ice in my voice surprising even myself. "I know how rich men hide money. I was the wife who organized the books." That caught her attention. Maya, I was learning, had her own legal demons out there. "Maybe," she said, "maybe we can talk, but first, you have another problem." She gestured with her head. "Your appointment." I knew she was right. My next appointment with Dr. Aris was that morning. Last time I begged. This time I would be prepared. When the guard called my number, I walked to the metal room with a purpose that straightened my back. When I entered, Dr. Aris was there with my file open, looking as tired as ever. "Ilara," he began. "Let's talk about—" I didn't let him finish. And I didn't sit down. "Dr. Aris," I said, my voice as firm as the metal of the desk. "In our last session, you mentioned my husband's file. Today, I'd like to add a document to mine." I pulled the divorce papers from under my blouse and placed them on the desk in front of him. My husband, the concerned man about my paranoia, handed me this. A divorce petition declaring me legally incompetent so he can take every penny we have. Dr. Aris looked at the papers, then at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Ilara, this is a legal matter, not a therapeutic one." "It is therapeutic," I retorted, my voice sharp, "because it proves my point. This isn't care, it's a crime. I'm not delusional. I'm being robbed. And you, by ignoring this, are being complicit." He recoiled. "I'm not complicit in anything." "Then prove it," I interrupted him. "I demand a second opinion from a psychiatrist not affiliated with Julian Croft. And I demand access to a real lawyer, one who isn't on his payroll. It's my right as a patient." I used his word. "Patient?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He didn't see the hysterical wife from Julian's file. He saw the woman who had just cornered him. He didn't promise anything. He cleared his throat and said, "I'll look into it." But when the guard took me away, I knew something had cracked. His file wasn't the only thing in the room anymore. Now, my anger was there too. Okay. The dynamic changed. Anger gave Ilara a purpose, and the system began to show its cracks. Here is Block 10, Topic 10 of 15. Topic 10. The Price of Truth. Returning to the common ward after my meeting with Dr. Aris was different. I felt as if an invisible spotlight was on me. I had made a scene. I had broken the unwritten protocol of being a passive, broken patient. I could feel the other women's eyes on me, not with the empty curiosity of before, but with something new, a mixture of caution and perhaps respect. I had spoken to one of the men in white suits in a way they couldn't, and I hadn't been punished for it. At least, not yet. I expected some kind of retaliation. Maybe my time in the yard would be revoked. Maybe they would transfer me to a worse cell. But nothing happened. The system, when confronted with something that didn't fit into its boxes, a crazy patient wielding coherent legal documents, seemed to freeze. It didn't know how to react. And in that brief moment of bureaucratic paralysis, the power at ground level began to shift. The proof came the next day in the laundry room. I was folding sheets, the hot steam filling my lungs, when a shadow fell over me. It was Red, the woman who had stolen my bread. My whole body tensed. She was one of the ward's unofficial enforcers, a woman who maintained order through silent intimidation. She bent down, pretending to pick up a fallen sheet. "I heard you made tired doctors sweat," she murmured, her voice low and husky. I didn't answer, just kept folding. "I heard you called him an accomplice." She gave a short laugh, like the scraping of sandpaper. "Brave girl, or very stupid." She straightened her back and gave me a long, assessing look. Then she gave me a slight nod. "Keep that energy," she said, and walked away. It wasn't an act of friendship. It was an acknowledgement. I was no longer fresh meat. I was something more. I was a player. That night, in the cell, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't the prisoner and the rookie anymore. It was two strategists. Maya sat on the bottom bunk, waiting for me. "You caused an earthquake," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, as always. "Aris is running around. The guards are confused. They hate lawyers. They hate unexpected paperwork. You're a headache." She paused, pulling a loose thread from her blanket. "I'll get the phone." My heart leapt. "How?" "Don't ask," she cut in. "There's a guard, one who likes to play games. He owes me. He'll give us 5 minutes on an untraceable phone in the maintenance office. But the price is what we talked about." She leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of vulnerability in her dark eyes. "My ex-husband is doing to my sister what yours is doing to you. He says she's unstable. He's trying to take her children. His lawyers are destroying her in court." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "These are her letters. I don't understand half the words. You do." I took the paper. The same cold legal language that was in my divorce papers. I understood. Julian, in his arrogance, had given me the only weapon that mattered here. He had trained me for 15 years to understand how rich and powerful men use the law to crush people. "Yes," I told Maya, my voice firm. "I understand every word. Tell me when the call will be. I'll tell you exactly what to say." "Perfect. The alliance is formed. Now, on to the execution. Here is Block 11, Topic 11 of 15. Topic 11. 5 minutes of whispers. 2 agonizing days passed. 2 days in which the gray routine seemed more tense than ever. Every time a guard looked at me for even a second longer, my stomach churned. I expected the door to open, that they would drag me into solitary confinement for my insolence toward Dr. Eris. But nothing happened. The bureaucracy was still paralyzed. On the 3rd night, well after the final count, when the only sound was the distant crying of someone in Ward C, Maya slid out of the bunk. She made no sound. She was a shadow moving within another shadow. "Now," she whispered, the word barely moving the air. The lock on our cell clicked. It wasn't the loud metallic sound of the guard's key. It was a soft click, like that of a tool. The guard Maya knew was on the other side, his face obscured by the darkness of the corridor. He didn't look at me. He just gestured with his head. 5 minutes, both of you. If I hear a word above a whisper, you two are going to the hole for a month. The hole was isolation. The place from which, they said, people returned changed, broken. We followed him. Our bare feet barely touched the cold concrete floor. Each step echoed in my head like thunder, though I knew we weren't making a sound. He led us through a service door I'd never seen open, down a short flight of stairs to a maintenance room. The smell of mold and machine oil was thick. In the corner, next to a breaker panel, was a dirty beige phone mounted on the wall. The guard pointed to it. "The clock is ticking." Maya looked at me. I was holding her sister's letters in my hand, crumpled with sweat. I'd spent the last 48 hours memorizing them, translating the legal language into Julian's war language. Maya dialed the number, her fingers pressing the buttons with trembling precision. She was calling her mother, the only link to her sister. The voice on the other end sounded tiny and frightened. "Mama? It's me. Don't speak, just listen." Maya's hand gripped the receiver so tightly that her knuckles were white. She looked at me. I became the screenwriter. "Tell her," I whispered to Maya, "not to sign anything, no matter what they say, especially if they say it's routine." Maya repeated. "Tell her to file a formal complaint against his lawyer for procedural harassment." Use those words. Harassment. Procedural, Maya repeated. "He's asking for an emergency psychological evaluation of her, right?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide. "Tell her to agree, but she must demand that it be a court-appointed evaluator, not one he chose," I whispered urgently. "That's crucial. Tell her to repeat, court-appointed." As I guided Maya, going over the same traps Julian had used against me, something extraordinary happened. Every piece of advice I gave her, I was giving to myself. Every tactic I exposed, I was mapping out Julian's strategy. I wasn't just arming Maya's sister, I was arming myself. I was transforming 15 years of passive humiliation into a manual for counterattack. The guard cleared his throat. 1 minute. Maya was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she repeated my words. "I love you, Mama. Tell her to be strong." She hung up the phone. We ran back to the cell, the soft click of the door closing behind us sealing our secret. Maya slid to the floor beside me, her breath ragged. She gripped my hand in the darkness. Her skin was cold, but her grip was steely. It wasn't a thank you. It was an alliance, sealed not in blood, but in something thicker, the cold, cruel language of the law that men use to erase us. Perfect. The alliance gave her a weapon, but now the system is fighting back. Here is Block 12, Topic 12 of 15. Topic 12, the white paper cup. The victory with Maya was a breath of pure oxygen in an airless room. For 48 hours, I felt lucid. I had a purpose. I had an ally. The ice in my veins felt like armor. I was ready for the next move. But I, in my newfound naivete, still thought I was playing chess. Julian was playing a different game, a game where he could turn the board around at any moment. The retaliation didn't come from Dr. Eris. It came from a much more insidious place. It was the next morning in the breakfast line. The same gray folder, the same smell of burnt coffee. But there was a new stop. A nurse I didn't recognize was standing next to a metal cart, handing out small white paper cups. She called out, "Red, Washington, Gomez," and then, "Croft." I stopped. I wasn't on medication. I never had been. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice calm. "I'm not on any medication." The nurse didn't even look up from her clipboard. "Ilara Croft, medication order, effective today, open." "What medication?" I demanded, and I could hear the edge of my voice becoming sharp, just like Julian always said it did. The nurse sighed impatiently. "Doctor's orders, dear. It's to calm you down. Now get the cup." A nearby guard, Guard Ramirez, the one Maya told me never to look at, stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. The message was clear. I wasn't being invited. "I want to see the order," I said, my voice low. The nurse, with a dramatic flourish of irritation, turned the clipboard toward me. And there it was. My name. And the signature. It wasn't Dr. Eris's sloppy handwriting. It was the elegant, right-leaning signature I knew as well as my own. Dr. Julian Croft. He was still my doctor of record. Dr. Eris had, no doubt, reported my agitation and my litigious behavior. And Julian, from his leather chair miles away, responded. He didn't respond with lawyers. He responded like a doctor. He was treating me. He was healing me from a distance. It was the most brilliant and cruel move of all. He knew I was struggling to keep my mind clear. So he decided to legally clout it. I was caught in the most perfect trap he had ever created. If I refused the medication, I would be uncooperative. I would be paranoid. I would be combative. I would be living proof that I was exactly the dangerous patient he described. They would take me into isolation, and I wouldn't have access to a phone, much less a lawyer. I would lose my alliance with Maya. I would lose everything. If I took it, I would be submitting to his weapon. I would be swallowing his lie, letting his chemicals do the work his persuasion couldn't. I would be letting him into my brain. I looked at the guard. I looked at the nurse. I looked at the line of women behind me, their faces blank. I could feel Maya's eyes on me, from across the room. She understood the trap. I picked up the small paper cup. The pill inside was small, white, and innocent. It looked like a piece of chalk. I put it on my tongue. The taste was bitter, chemical. I drank the water from the metal cup they gave me, and as I swallowed, I felt something colder than ice in my veins. It was the feeling of defeat. He had found me. Even here, he had found me. And now, he wasn't just outside the walls. He was inside me. Okay. The chemical weapon has been introduced. Now, the effects. Here is Block 13, Topic 13 of 15. Topic 13. The chalk fog. It wasn't like sleeping. It wasn't a relief. The medication took about 30 minutes to kick in, and it wasn't like a hammer. It was like a heavy, wet blanket being placed over my head, an inch at a time. The first thing I noticed was that the sounds of the cafeteria lost their sharpness. The scraping of trays, the shouted orders, the distant crying. Everything seemed to recede, as if I were hearing the world underwater. The chalky taste of the pill lingered at the back of my throat, a physical reminder of the invasion. When we went to the laundry room, the hot steam, which usually smelled of bleach and labor, now felt suffocating. I picked up a sheet to fold, but my hands felt disconnected from me. They were slow, heavy, as if moving through honey. I watched, as if from afar, the sheet slip from my fingers and fall to the dirty floor. Red growled at me, but the sound didn't reach me. Maya quickly grabbed the sheet, her movement swift and irritated, instinctively protecting me. But the worst part wasn't the physical slowness. It was the mental fog. The icy anger, the crystal-clear clarity I'd gained from the divorce papers, was dissolving. I tried to cling to my strategy, my plan, the words I'd said to Dr. Aris, but the thoughts wouldn't connect. They were like soap bubbles, forming and bursting before I could grasp them. And in the fog, Julian's voice returned. This time it wasn't accusatory. It was gentle. See, darling? It's not so bad, he seemed to whisper in my ear. You were so tense, so angry. Isn't it better this way? Just relax, let go. Fighting is what tires you out. The drug wasn't knocking me out. It was making me, by persuading, she was making his version of reality easier to accept. The fog made relaxation seem like sanity, and clarity seem like illness. The very struggle for my mind seemed exhausting. Maybe he was right. Maybe fighting was the problem. Maybe. That night, in the cell, I didn't sit against the wall. I lay on the floor and the concrete didn't even feel that cold. I just stared at the ceiling, but I wasn't really seeing. Maya climbed down from the bunk. I barely registered her movement. She crouched beside me in the darkness, and her face was close to mine. Ilara, she whispered, and her voice seemed to come from far away. What did they give you? I blinked slowly. White, I murmured. Little one. She cursed softly, a sharp sound that cut through the fog for a second. It's what they give to the screamers. It's what they gave the woman in 3C before she stopped talking. Forever. She cupped my face in both hands, her rough palms against my skin. "You can't let it win," she hissed, her urgency desperately trying to reach me. "Fight it. The anger. Remember the anger." I tried. I tried to focus on Julian's face, on his mistress's face, on the divorce papers. But they were like faded photographs. The chemical in my blood didn't want me to be angry. It wanted me to sleep. "I'm tired," I whispered. Maya shook me, hard. "No, you're not tired. You're being poisoned." And that word, poisoned, it was the only thing that managed to get through. It pierced the fog like a needle. It wasn't medication. It was poison. I wasn't being treated. I was being silenced. Okay. The word poison was the key. Now, the resistance begins. Here is Block 14, Topic 14 of 15. Topic 14. The bitter taste of survival. The word poison, it stayed with me through the night, a sharp anchor in the muddy sea of medication. When the shrill alarm sounded at 5 a.m., I didn't wake up. I emerged. The fog was still there, a chemical headache and a sluggishness in my limbs, but the terror had been replaced by a cold determination. I knew what I had to do. The breakfast line, the nurse, the metal cart. Everything was identical. Guard Ramirez was there, his dead eyes scanning the line, looking for trouble. "Croft," the nurse called, her voice already bored. She held out the white paper cup. My fingers didn't tremble. I looked at the pill. It was small, white, and looked like a promise of silence. I knew that refusing was a sentence of isolation. Refusing was what Julie and I expected. That was the proof he needed that I was uncooperative. I picked up the glass. I put it to my mouth. But when I lifted the metal glass of water to my lips, I didn't swallow the pill. I slid it to the side, trapping it between my gum and my cheek. It was a skill I didn't know I had, born of pure survival instinct. The taste was awful. Instantly, a bitter, chemical, chalky taste flooded my mouth, making my throat want to close up. The nurse looked at me. "Drink it all." I drank the water, the liquid passing over the hidden pill, causing it to begin to dissolve. It was torture. "Open your mouth," she ordered, standard procedure. I opened it, lifting my tongue, keeping my cheek contracted. She glanced quickly. "Okay, next." I moved away from the line, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the guard could hear. I could feel the pill disintegrating, the poison seeping into my saliva. I walked, not ran, to the cafeteria. I sat in my usual spot. I couldn't eat. I just sat there, the chemical taste filling my head, until I had the first chance to go to the bathroom. I leaned over the metal toilet and spat out the white, muddy paste. I rinsed my mouth again and again, but the taste remained. The taste of my small, disgusting victory. In the laundry room, the fog was there, but it was a pale shadow of what it had been the day before. I could feel its edge, but my mind was behind it. It was clear. Maya found me near the dryers. I didn't say anything, just nodded slightly. An almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Good," she murmured. "But now comes the hard part." I looked at her. "What?" "Now," she said, her dark eyes fixed on mine. "You have Toto fake. They didn't give you this shit to kill you. They gave it to calm you down. If you suddenly seem clear, sharp, angry, they'll know. They'll hold you down and inject you, and you can't spit out a needle." I stopped, the rough sheet in my hands. She was right. Julian, Dr. Aris, the nurse, they didn't want a Lara, the fighter. They wanted a Lara, the sedated patient. If I wanted to fight, I had to give them exactly what they wanted. I had to use their own weapon as my disguise. I had to hide behind the mist I was spitting. From that moment on, I became two people. On the outside, I moved slowly. I let my eyes unfocus. I spoke with a hesitant slowness. I became the sedated ghost they wanted. But inside, the ice was forming again, harder and sharper than ever. Perfect. The performance is set. This is the final segment of our journey, the moment when the mask becomes the weapon. Here is Block 15, Topic 15 of 15. Topic 15. The distorted mirror. My world had become a stage. Every morning, I performed the bitter ritual of hiding Julian's poison in my cheek, swallowing just enough to keep the chemical taste on my breath, enough so that if they did a blood test, they would find traces. I spat the rest out in the disgusting privacy of the bathroom. And then, I put on my mask. I moved through the laundry room with deliberate slowness. I looked at the guards with eyes I struggled to keep empty, slightly unfocused. At my next session with Dr. Aris, I didn't confront him. I sat. I looked at my hands. I don't know, I said. It's quiet. In my head, quieter. He nodded, satisfied, making notes. The medication seems to be helping, Alara. You seem less agitated. I gave him the ghost he wanted to see. And in his report, I'm sure he wrote, patient responding positively to treatment. Less combative, accepting her situation. I became the model patient. I was a success. I was proof that Julian's diagnosis was correct and that his treatment was working. My progress earned me a privilege. Not the phone. Something better. Supervised access to the institution's library. It wasn't a real library. It was an old converted cafeteria smelling of dust and donated musty books. But it had 2 computers. 2 old, slow terminals, connected to the internet through a filter that blocked almost everything. We had 30 minutes a week. A guard watched the entire room. I knew every click was monitored. I didn't search for defense attorney. I didn't search for Julian Croft. I sat down, and to the guard watching, it looked like I was reading articles about gardening. But behind that window, I typed the name that haunted me. Chloe Jennings. The mistress. The patient. The surrogate. There wasn't much. Lifestyle articles, social media stuff that Julian undoubtedly had her locked away. But I kept digging. I used the knowledge I had, the names of the universities he was affiliated with, the conferences he boasted about. And then I found it. An archived newsletter, a PDF of a university publication from 6 years ago. It was a grainy black and white photograph. It read, Dr. Julian Croft, our newest associate professor, congratulates his star research intern Chloe Jennings on her thesis. He was smiling, his hand on her shoulder. She was looking at him with an adoration that made my stomach churn. 6 years. Their relationship wasn't new. It wasn't a 6-month affair. She wasn't a patient he seduced. She was a student he prepared. He had a pattern. And the date on the report card. It was the same spring that Julian convinced me to take a break from my career because I was too stressed. The same year he started suggesting that my anxiety needed attention. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing for disposal. He was diagnosing me at home while training my replacement at work. I closed the browser window. My time was up. That night, in the cell, I didn't sit on the floor. I sat on the bottom bunk, which Maya and I now silently shared. The taste of the dissolved pill was still in my mouth, but it had changed. It tasted like gunpowder. I looked at the polished metal sink, my distorted reflection staring back at me. I saw the lifeless hair, the dark eyes, the gray uniform. I saw the madwoman Julian had created, but she was no longer a ghost. She was a weapon. Julian's file said I was dangerous and unstable, and he was right. He just didn't realize that he was the one who made me this way. He didn't lock me up here to hide my madness. He locked me up to hide his crime. He thought this cell was the end of my story. He didn't realize it was the beginning of his. The real battle wasn't to get out. It was to ensure that, when I got out, he would take my place. Okay, this is the final block, the epilogue to Alara's journey. Here is Block 16, final topic, the cold air of truth. Topic 16, the cold air of truth. My performance as the sedated patient was flawless. I was the ghost they wanted, a shadow floating through the laundry room and the library with empty eyes and a closed mouth. But behind that mask of chemical fog, I was working. The information I found, The PDF, the dates, the proof of Chloe's 6 years of preparation became my obsession. I passed it to Maya on scraps of cigarette paper, and Maya, true to our alliance, found a way to get it out. I don't know how. I didn't ask. Some debts are paid in silence. The information reached the only person in the outside world who might have a shred of interest in listening to me. My sister. The same sister Julian convinced me to alienate. She received Maya's whispers from the outside and turned them into a scream. She hired a lawyer who wasn't on Julian's payroll. The change wasn't like a thunderclap. It was like the slow creak of breaking ice. First, Dr. Aris was replaced on my case. Then, one day, it wasn't a guard who summoned me. It was a woman in a suit with a briefcase. She led me into the same metal room, but she didn't sit behind the desk. She sat beside me. "Mrs. Croft," she said, "I'm your new lawyer. I was appointed by the court at your sister's request." And for the first time, I let the mask slip. I stopped pretending. I looked at her, and the fog lifted. "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm being poisoned." I spat the morning pill, still partially dissolved, into my palm and slid it across the desk. And I can prove it. What followed was a battle of files. Julian's meticulous filing against the facts. But he, in all his arrogance, made a mistake. He believed I was just his victim. He forgot that I was his partner for 15 years. I knew where he kept his money. I knew the names of his offshore accounts. I knew his research clinic was a front to hide investments. I gave everything to my lawyer. While Julian's world began to crumble on the outside, medical board investigations, financial audits, my world on the inside began to solidify. The second evaluation, the one I demanded from Dr. Aris, finally happened. It was with a woman from Boston, a forensic psychiatrist who had no loyalty to Julian. I told her everything. The calm voice, the mistress, the divorce papers, the diagnosis, after of the discovery, the poison. When I finished, she closed the notebook. "Mrs. Croft," she said, "you're not suffering from psychosis. You're suffering from your husband." The day I left, there was no celebration. I didn't leave through the front gate. I went out a side door, straight to my sister's car. The air outside was cold, and it smelled of rain and car exhaust. It hurt to breathe. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands, now scarred from laundry bleach, trembling in my lap. I was free, but I wasn't the same Ilara who came in. Julian locked me in to break me, but he didn't understand. You can't break something that's already breaking. You only transform it into something new. I'm not the wife he betrayed. I'm not the patient he diagnosed. I'm the result of his experiment. He wanted to see what would happen if you pushed someone beyond the limit. And I am the answer. The battle with Julian isn't over. He's embroiled in legal proceedings that will consume the rest of his arrogant life. He lost his license. He lost his house. He lost the aura of respectability that was his true oxygen. I won. But when I look in the mirror, I don't see the woman I used to be. I see the woman who survived. I see the woman who learned to spit venom and use it as ink. He thought the cell was my prison. It was his incubator. And the thing he created, the thing I became, is finally free, perfect. Here's the rewritten conclusion, to include calls to action to like, subscribe, and share, while maintaining Ilara's confessional and intimate tone. Ilara's voice is calm now, no longer trembling or icy, but firm. There's a sense of distance, like someone looking back at a war that's over. The cell wasn't the end of my story. It was the place where I stopped reading the script Julian wrote for me and started writing my own. He, the brilliant psychiatrist, the master of the mind, made the fundamental mistake. He thought the mind was something he could break and fix as he pleased. He didn't understand that the human soul, when cornered, doesn't break. It sharpens. He tried to drown me in his lies, but he didn't realize I would learn to breathe underwater. He gave me poison, and I learned to use it as ink. He threw me into darkness, and I learned to see. Her voice becomes more intimate, speaking directly to the listener. Sometimes, the cruelest prison isn't made of concrete and steel. It's the prison someone builds inside your mind. It's the doubt they plant, the silent poison of, "You're crazy, you're exaggerating, you're unstable." If you've ever had your voice silenced, if someone who should have protected you used your trust as a weapon, making you doubt your own sanity, then this story, in some way, is yours too. Remember, they can lock up your body, but they can't imprison your truth. Sometimes you need to walk through the fire of someone else's lies to find your own intact soul on the other side. Thank you for listening. Telling this story is like breathing my first real breath of fresh air. If this story resonated with you, if it touched a place you recognize, please click like so that more people can find it. And if you believe that these survival stories need to be told, consider subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community of listeners who understand that truth matters. Please, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not alone and that their voice is not lost. And leave a comment below. What did my journey make you feel? Your voice matters a lot here. Your stories matter. And I will be reading them with care and attention.